A millionaire was about to lose everything because a briefcase containing crucial documents had gone missing. At the most tense moment of her life, the daughter of her former maid appeared with the briefcase in her hands. She made only one simple request in return, which left everyone in shock. Before listening to this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting tales. Marco Allianz observed the city through the panoramic window of his office on the top floor of the imposing building that housed Allianz Incorporadora. At 52 years old, his face bore the marks of someone who had built an empire with his own hands, brick by brick, business by business. His neatly trimmed grey beard framed a countenance that alternated between the seriousness of a respected businessman and the weariness of a man who hadn't known what it was to rest in a long time. He adjusted his navy blue tie, a gift from his mother on his 40th birthday. She had passed away shortly afterward. That piece of fine fabric was one of the few emotional connections he maintained in his wardrobe, overflowing with impeccably tailored suits. Marco lived for his work, for that concrete and glass empire he had built over 15 years. He had never married, never had children. Allianz Incorporadora was his family, his inheritance, and his legacy. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Allianz, the board is already meeting in the conference room," his assistant Viola informed him with her usual efficiency. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes," he replied, running a hand through his grey hair. This was no ordinary meeting. It was a decisive moment. The fate of everything he had built would be decided on that cold July morning. Marco picked up his genuine leather briefcase, a gift from a satisfied client after the completion of a coastal project, but as he opened it to check the documents, he felt an emptiness in his chest. The special folder, the one with the company's gold seal engraved in the lower right corner, wasn't there. The original documents, the evidence he needed to present to the board to refute the accusations of overpricing that had been undermining his credibility in recent months, had disappeared. "Viola!" he called, his voice louder than he intended. The assistant appeared at the door almost instantly, as if she sensed the urgency. "Yes, Mr. Allianz?" "The folder containing the original documents for Project Horizon. Where is it?" "You took her home last night, don't you remember? You said you wanted to review the documents one last time before the meeting." Marco closed his eyes for a second, trying to recall the previous night. Yes, he had taken the briefcase. He remembered placing it on the dining table in his apartment, pouring himself a glass of wine, and beginning the review. Then the phone rang. It was Victor Limen, his former partner, wanting to discuss pending matters. The call had been tense, full of insinuations and veiled threats. Calling home now wouldn't help, Marco thought. I wouldn't have time to go and come back before the meeting. "Sir?" Viola insisted, concerned by the boss's pale face. "Let them know I'll be late. Tell them I had an unexpected problem." "But Sir, Councillor Felipe emphasized the importance of starting on time. Mr. Victor has already arrived, accompanied by his son." This was worse than he had imagined. Victor and Theo Lyman, father and son, united in a seemingly simple mission to destroy everything Marco had built. "Did Victor bring his son?" he asked, surprised. Theo rarely appeared at board meetings, preferring to stay behind the scenes, moving the pieces with the precision of a chess player. "Yes, sir, and they brought the external audit report." Marco felt his stomach clench. Without the original documents, it would be impossible to refute the biased report that he knew Victor had commissioned specifically for that occasion. 15 years of work, hundreds of families dependent on Allianz, all threatened because a file had mysteriously disappeared. "Go ahead, Viola, tell them I'm coming." When the assistant left, Marco allowed himself a moment of despair, rested his hands on the glass table and lowered his head. How could this have happened? The documents proved that the accusations of overbilling were false, that the contracts had been approved by all legal authorities, including by Victor, when they were still partners. Without them, his word would be against that of a renowned auditing firm, bought by his rival, but still respected in the market. The businessman took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. He couldn't show weakness, not now. He picked up the phone and dialed his apartment, in the remote hope that some employee might locate the briefcase and bring it to him in time. No one answered. Of course, it was Monday, the housekeeper's day off. Marco straightened his jacket and walked towards the meeting room. As he passed through the building's main lobby, something unusual caught his attention. A girl who didn't appear to be older than 12 was sitting on one of the leather sofas holding a briefcase. Not just any briefcase, but one identical to the one he was looking for, with the same gold Allianz Incorporadora seal in the lower right corner. The security guard approached her with a stern expression, probably to ask her to leave. The building was no place for unaccompanied children, especially not on a day when the board was meeting. "Wait," Marco said to the security guard approaching him. The girl looked up at him, large, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold more stories than one would expect from someone so young. She wore a simple school uniform, with a worn name tag pinned to her shirt. Marco squinted to read the name on the tag and felt a shiver run down his spine. "Rose Carmin," he murmured, almost to himself. Rose had been an exemplary employee in the finance department until she was fired 3 years earlier on charges of accounting irregularities. Marco vaguely remembered the case. He hadn't been directly involved in the dismissal, as he was focused on expanding the company into the interior at the time. The process had been handled by Victor, who then headed the finance department. "Are you Rose Carmin's daughter?" he asked the girl. She nodded, pressing the folder against her chest. "My name is Helena," she replied, her voice surprisingly firm for someone so young. "And I've come to return something that belongs to you, sir." Marco looked at the folder and then back at the girl. Could it be? Was that the folder he was looking for? "Where did you get that?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the storm of questions brewing in his mind. "I found it at the back of my mother's closet, among old things," Helena explained. "When I saw the logo, I recognized it. My mother worked here." "And why did you bring her now?" Helena hesitated, looking at the floor for a moment before answering. "Because my mother always said that no matter what happens, we should do what is right." There was something in the way the girl spoke, a maturity beyond her years, that touched Marco deeply. He reached out, silently asking to see the folder. "May I?" he asked. Helena handed him the folder, but didn't let go completely. "Before returning it, I need to ask for something in return," he said with the same firmness as before. Marco frowned, surprised by the audacity. "And what would that be?" "A chance," Helena replied. "A chance to study at a good school to have a better future. That's what my mother always wanted. For me." The businessman glanced at his watch. The meeting should have already started. Victor and his son would be there, savoring every minute of his lateness, preparing the ground for his downfall. "Helena," he finally said, "if these documents are what I think they are, you've just saved my company, and I never leave a debt unpaid." The girl finally let go of the folder, allowing Marco to open it. Inside were all the original documents for Project Horizon, a little crumpled, with damp marks on the edges, but legible and, most importantly, signed by everyone involved, including Victor. "How did your mother manage that?" he asked, perplexed. "I don't know," Helena replied honestly. "She never talked about working at home. I only found the folder yesterday when I was looking for old photos for a school project." Marco closed the folder, making a quick decision. "Viola!" he called, seeing that his assistant was returning to the lobby to look for him. "Mr. Allianz, the board is waiting. Mr. Victor just suggested that they start without you." "Tell them I'm coming right now," she replied. Then, turning to Helena, she added, "Could you wait here? I promise I won't be long." The girl nodded, sitting back down on the sofa. "Viola, please stay with Helena. Get her something to eat and drink. I'll take care of that as soon as the meeting is over." With the documents in hand, Marco walked with firm steps to the meeting room. As he opened the door, all eyes turned to him. Victor, seated at the head of the table that rightfully belonged to Marco, displayed a confident smile. Beside him, Theo, recently turned 30 and wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than the annual salary of many Allianz employees, observed the scene with clinical interest. "I apologize for the delay, gentlemen," said Marco, walking to his seat. "I had an unforeseen issue which, thankfully, has already been resolved." He placed the folder on the table and opened it with a calculated gesture. Victor's smile faltered for an instant, almost imperceptibly, But Marco caught that moment of surprise and knew his former partner was directly involved in the disappearance of the documents. The question was, how had they ended up with Rose Carmen? And what else could that folder reveal besides the evidence that saved his company? As he began presenting the documents to the board, Marco couldn't stop thinking about the girl waiting in the lobby. Helena, the daughter of a former employee fired under suspicious circumstances, had just changed the course of his life. And somehow, he knew that this encounter would change much more than just the outcome of that meeting. The board meeting lasted exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes. For Marco, every second was a battle fought in a minefield, where every word could mean victory or defeat. With the original documents in hand, he managed to refute, one by one, the accusations of overpricing that threatened his reputation and the survival of Allianz Incorporadora. Victor maintained his composure throughout the presentation, but the rigidity of his jaw betrayed his growing frustration. Theo, on the other hand, observed everything with calculated detachment, as if watching a game of chess between amateurs. Occasionally he made notes in a small leather notebook, without showing any emotion. When Marco finally finished his presentation, the silence in the room was thick, almost palpable. It was Felipe, the company's most senior and respected advisor, who broke the tension. "I believe that the documents presented by Mr. Allianz completely clarify the issues raised by the external audit report," he stated, adjusting his thin-rimmed glasses. "I suggest we conclude this discussion and move on to the other items on the agenda." Victor cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "The documents appear to be in order, it's true, but that doesn't explain the discrepancies found by the audit," he insisted, glancing quickly at Theo, who remained impassive. "I suggest a new analysis, this time with the original documents." "I believe we've already wasted enough time on this matter," interrupted another advisor, a gentleman with completely white hair who rarely spoke at meetings. "Investors are uneasy about these rumors. We need to put an end to this issue once and for all." The proposal was put to a vote, and by 7 votes to 2, the 2 opposing votes predictably coming from Victor and Theo, it was decided that the accusations were unfounded and that the company would continue its normal course under Marco's leadership. "Meeting adjourned," announced Felipe, lightly tapping the gavel on the table. As the advisors left the room, Marco noticed Theo approaching. The young man wore a polite smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Impressive recovery, Mr. Allianz," he commented, in that modulated voice that always seemed to hide something. "My father was right about one thing. You really are a survivor." "It's not about survival, Theo," Marco replied, carefully putting the documents back in the folder. "It's about the truth." "The truth is always so relative, don't you think?" retorted the young man, adjusting his tie knot in a studied gesture. "Today was your day. Tomorrow, who knows?" Before Marco could answer, Theo had already turned away, joining his father, who was waiting for him near the door. Victor cast one last, resentful glance before leaving without saying goodbye. Felipe approached Marco as soon as the Limen family left the room. "You were lucky today," he said quietly. "Very convenient that these documents reappeared, wasn't it?" "It wasn't luck, Felipe. It was justice." "Perhaps," the advisor agreed, though his tone suggested doubt, "but Victor won't give up easily. You know that." Marco nodded, thinking of the girl waiting for him in the lobby. "Yes, I know, and that's why I need to find out exactly what happened, starting by understanding how these documents ended up in the hands of a former employee." Felipe frowned, intrigued. "Former employee?" "Rose Carmen," Marco explained. "Do you remember her? She was fired a few years ago, accused of accounting irregularities." The advisor seemed uncomfortable with the mention of that name. "Vaguely," he replied, avoiding Marco's gaze. "It was before my more active involvement on the board. Victor handled that case, if I'm not mistaken." "Exactly. And now her daughter shows up with documents that could save my company. Curious, don't you think?" Felipe adjusted his glasses, a habit that intensified when he was nervous. "Be careful, Marco. You just overcame one crisis. Don't create another one by stirring up past issues. Some issues from the past have an annoying habit of reappearing in the present, whether we like it or not, Marco replied, closing the folder with a metallic click. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a promise to keep. She left the meeting room with firm steps, her mind already planning her next moves. In the lobby, Helena was still seated on the same sofa, but now with a glass of juice in front of her and a half-eaten sandwich in her hands. Upon seeing Marco, the girl stood up, quickly wiping the corners of her mouth with a napkin. "How was it?" he asked, with a curiosity that seemed genuine. Marco allowed himself a slight smile. "Thanks to you, very well done. The documents were exactly what I needed." Helena nodded, as if she had already expected that answer. "That's good," he said simply. Then, hesitantly, "About our agreement." "A man of his word always keeps his promises," Marco replied. "But first, I'd like to better understand your situation. May I invite you to lunch? I know a restaurant nearby where we can talk more calmly." The girl seemed to consider the proposal for a few moments. There was caution in her eyes, the natural distrust of someone who had learned early on that life rarely offers gifts without something in return. "I need to be home before 4, she finally replied. "My neighbor, Mrs. Olivia, can only look after my little brother until that time." Marco checked his watch. 1:45 p.m. "We have enough time," he assured her. "Viola, please cancel my afternoon appointments. An urgent matter has come up." The assistant nodded, already accustomed to her boss's sudden schedule changes. "Any restaurant in particular, Mr. Allianz?" "Cantina di Luca, please. Table 4-2. Tell them it's for me, they'll know what to do." 20 minutes later, Marco and Helena were seated at a discreet table in the back of the Italian restaurant. The place was elegant, without being ostentatious, with soft lighting and a welcoming atmosphere. A middle-aged man approached as soon as they were seated. "Signor Allianz, c'è piacere rivederla," he greeted effusively. "Thank you, Luca. This is Helena, my special guest today." The owner smiled at the girl, who seemed slightly uncomfortable with all the attention. "Welcome, Miss Helena. Let me bring our special menu for you." When Luca walked away, Helena looked around, absorbing every detail of her surroundings. Marco noticed that despite her simple clothes, the girl had a dignified, almost haughty posture. "Have you ever been to a restaurant like this before?" he asked kindly. Helena shook her head. "No, we usually eat at home, or at fast food restaurants when Mum was too tired to cook." The use of the past tense did not go unnoticed. "Your mother," Marco began hesitantly. "She fell ill last year," Helena explained with surprising composure for someone so young. "A blood disease. The doctor said it was very fast, that there was nothing they could do." "I'm so sorry," Marco said sincerely. Although he barely remembered Rose, the idea of a child losing their mother so young moved him deeply. "Since then, it's just been me and my brother, Aaron. He's 6 years old." "And your father?" Helena shrugged, a gesture that combined indifference and resignation. "I never met him. Mum said he traveled far away before I was born." Marco nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. 2 children practically alone in the world. "Who will take care of you now?" "Mrs. Olivia, our neighbor, looks after Aaron while I'm at school. She's very good, but she's getting old. She can't take care of us all the time." Helena paused, as if measuring her next words. "Mum left some money, and there's government assistance. But it's not much. That's why school is so important to me. I need to graduate, get a good job, for me and for Aaron." Marco felt a lump in his throat. The determination of that child, facing responsibilities that many adults would avoid, was both moving and disturbing. What kind of world allowed a 12-year-old girl to have to carry such a burden? Luca returned with the menus, but Marco gestured to dismiss them. "Bring your best today, Luca. I trust you." While they waited for their food, Marco decided to broach the subject that wouldn't leave his mind. "Helena, you said you found the folder among your mother's things. Was there anything else with it? Notes, letters, anything related to the company?" The girl took a sip of water before answering. "There were some notes in an old notebook, and photos from the time she worked at the company." She kept everything in a box at the back of the closet. And what did those notes say? Helena looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. I didn't read everything. I thought they were her personal things. Marco noticed the girl's reluctance and decided not to insist, at least for now. I understand. And how are you all managing? With school? Home? We'll manage, Helena replied, with that maturity that continued to surprise Marco. Mom always said we're like plants that grow in the cracks of concrete, small but strong. The food arrived, momentarily interrupting the conversation. Helena stared wide-eyed at the plate of handmade pasta covered in a delicate sauce and sautéed shrimp. Is this for me? She asked, almost in disbelief. Sure, Marco smiled. Try it. Luca makes the best pasta in town. He watched as the girl tasted the first bite, savoring it with evident pleasure. It's the most delicious thing I've ever eaten, he declared, with the sincerity typical of childhood. During lunch, they talked about lighter things. Helena spoke about her school, her teachers, and the subjects she liked best. She was a diligent student, especially in math and science. She dreamed of being an engineer or architect, to build beautiful and safe houses for people like us. She explained. When dessert was served, a tiramisu that made Helena's eyes sparkle even brighter, Marco finally broached the main subject. Helena, regarding our agreement, I thought a lot during the meeting and I'd like to make a proposal. The girl stared at him intently. I want to offer you and your brother much more than just a school. I want to provide a safe home, proper care, academic support, and everything else you need to grow up healthy and have all the opportunities you deserve. Helena frowned suspiciously. And what would you gain from that? Marco appreciated the frankness of the question. The satisfaction of helping someone who helped me, and perhaps the chance to better understand what happened to her mother and those documents. Helena remained silent for a few moments, considering the proposal. Do you want to adopt us? He finally asked directly. Not exactly, Marco replied honestly. At least, not immediately. The adoption process is complex, and you barely know me. What I propose is to be your legal guardian, offering financial, educational, and emotional support. Over time, we'll see how things evolve. The girl pondered her answer, displaying impressive caution for her age. And, Aaron, would we stay together? Always, Marco assured. That's non-negotiable. Could we visit Mom's grave regularly? Of course. And the school? Would it be one of those where all the children are rich and look down on anyone who is different? Marco couldn't help but smile slightly at the insight of the question. It will be a school where you will receive the best possible education, but yes, there will probably be many children from wealthy families. However, I'm sure you'll know how to handle that. You seem like the type of person who isn't easily intimidated. Helena allowed herself, a small smile the first since they had met. Mom used to say the same thing. She seemed to be a very wise woman. The girl nodded, swallowing hard, as if fighting back a wave of emotion. Can I consider your proposal? And talk to Aaron? Of course, Marco replied, respecting the mature way Helena was handling the situation. But I'd like to meet your brother and see where you live. Could you take me to your house today? Helena hesitated, but eventually agreed. That's fine. Ms. Olivia will be there and Aaron will probably enjoy meeting you. He's more confident than I am with new people. After lunch, Marco asked his driver to take them to the address Helena had given them. They left the city's business center and headed for a neighborhood in the northern part of the city, where increasingly modest buildings were replacing the glass and steel skyscrapers. The contrast between Marco's world and Helena's became more evident with each block they passed. Finally, they arrived at a simple housing complex with 4-story apartment blocks painted in a faded shade of yellow. It's here, said Helena, when the car stopped in front of Block C. Marco got out of the vehicle, trying not to show surprise at the simplicity of the place. He followed Helena to the 3rd floor, where she unlocked the door to apartment 32 with a key she had hanging around her neck, hidden under her uniform. We've arrived, he announced, entering the small apartment. A grey-haired lady rose from a worn armchair, while a bright-eyed, dark-haired boy, interrupted his game with colourful blocks to observe the visitor. "Helena. And who is this gentleman?" asked the lady with visible concern. "Mrs. Olivia, this is Mr. Marco Alliance. He owns the company where Mum used to work." "Nice to meet you, ma'am," Marco greeted, extending his hand. Donna Olivia hesitated before accepting it, looking at it with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. "The pleasure is mine," he finally replied. "But what brings you here, if I may ask?" Before Marco could answer, little Aaron approached, watching him with curious eyes. "Do you have a big car down there?" he asked bluntly. "Aaron!" Helena scolded, embarrassed. "Yes, I do," Marco replied, bending down to be at the boy's level. "And perhaps if your sister allows, we can take it for a ride sometime." Aaron's eyes gleamed with excitement, but Helena quickly intervened. "Mr. Marco came to talk about school, Aaron. Remember I said I wanted a better school for us?" The boy nodded, losing some of his enthusiasm. "School is boring. I want to go for a drive." Marco smiled, charmed by the boy's spontaneity. Then he turned to Mrs. Olivia. "Madam, I would like to speak with you about Helena and Aaron, if possible. I have a proposal that could significantly improve their lives." The old woman cast a worried glance at Helena, who nodded slightly as if giving permission for the conversation to proceed. "In that case," said Mrs. Olivia, indicating the small kitchen table, "I think we should sit down. It seems we have a lot to talk about." As they settled in, Marco observed the small apartment. It was clean and organized, but the signs of financial hardship were evident. Worn furniture, old appliances, walls in need of repainting. On a shelf near the window, he noticed some framed photos. In one of them, he recognized Rose Carmin, smiling next to a younger Helena, probably 8 or 9 years old. The image of that woman, who for so long had been just a vague name in his memory, was now taking on real form. And as he began to explain his intentions to Mrs. Olivia, Marco couldn't help but wonder what had really happened to Rose Carmin, and how had the documents that saved his company ended up in his hands? That was just the beginning of a story far more complex than she could have imagined. 2 weeks had passed since the day Helena appeared with the briefcase in the lobby of Allianz Incorporadora. In that short period, the lives of the girl and her brother had been completely transformed. Marco had kept his promise. After lengthy conversations with social workers, lawyers, and Olivia herself, he had obtained temporary custody of the children. The process hadn't been simple. A single businessman, with no experience with children, taking responsibility for 2 orphans, naturally generated distrust within the child protection system. However, the combination of his influence, financial resources, and genuine determination to help the siblings ultimately prevailed. Marco's apartment, a spacious duplex in the best neighborhood of the capital, had gained 2 new suites, decorated especially for the siblings. Helena had chosen shades of blue and green for her room, while Aaron had opted for a space theme, with phosphorescent stars on the ceiling that glowed in the dark. That Saturday morning, Marco watched his siblings during breakfast. Aaron devoured pancakes with chocolate syrup, already completely adapted to his new life. Helena, on the other hand, still maintained a certain reserve, as if she feared that all of this could disappear at any moment. "You hardly ate anything," Marco commented, noticing that the girl was merely stirring the eggs on her plate. "I'm not very hungry," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "Are you nervous about the new school?" he asked, trying to find the root of her discomfort. Helena was starting on Monday at St. Patrick's College, one of the most prestigious schools in the capital. The girl shrugged, a gesture that Marco had already learned to interpret as an attempt to downplay his worries. "A little." "Helena really doesn't eat much," Aaron interjected, his mouth smeared with chocolate. "Mom always used to yell at me because she'd save food in her backpack to give to me later." Marco felt a pang in his chest. That simple observation revealed more about the children's past lives than any social report. "Well, here you'll never have to worry about that," he assured them, keeping his voice steady to hide his emotion. "There will always be enough food for everyone." Helena gave her brother a disapproving look, which he didn't seem to notice. "May I leave the table? I'd like to finish organizing my books," he asked. "Of course," Marco replied, "but don't forget that we have an appointment with Dr. Agnes at 11. It's important that you talk to her about the new school. Helena nodded and left the table, heading to her room. Marco sighed, watching her walk away. Adaptation would be a slow process, he knew that. The child psychologist, Dr. Agnes Muller, had been clear. Children who had experienced significant losses often developed emotional protection mechanisms that included not easily becoming attached to new situations or people. "She'll be fine," said the housekeeper, Anna, as she cleared away the dishes. "It's just a matter of time." Anna was a middle-aged woman who had worked for Marco for over 10 years. Initially resistant to the idea of having children in the house, she quickly became fond of Aaron and adopted a maternal attitude towards Helena. "I hope so," Marco replied. "Do you think she's eating enough?" "No," Anna replied honestly. "But I've noticed she hides fruit and cookies in her room. It's a hard habit to break when you've lived with food insecurity." Marco nodded, impressed once again by his housekeeper's perspicacity. "Did I do well to listen to her and not confront Helena about it?" "Yes, she did. Over time, when she truly feels safe, this behavior will decrease. Confronting her now would only increase her distrust." Aaron, who had finished his coffee, tugged at Marco's shirt sleeve. "You promised to teach me how to play chess today," the boy reminded him. "And I will keep my promise," Marco smiled. "As soon as I finish answering some emails. Why don't you go play a little while I wait?" The boy nodded and ran off toward the playroom, one of the new additions to Marco's apartment. As he watched him, the businessman couldn't help but think about how Aaron adapted much more easily to the new situation. According to Dr. Agnes, this was common. Younger children tend to be more resilient and adaptable, while older children carry more memories and responsibilities. After coffee, Marco retired to his home office. He needed to review some contracts before the board meeting on Monday. Since he had managed to prove his innocence with the documents brought by Helena, most of the board members had reaffirmed their support for his management. However, Victor and Theo continued to pull strings behind the scenes, looking for ways to undermine him. He was engrossed in reading a report when he heard a light knock on the door. "Come in," he said, without looking up from the document. Helena appeared in the doorway, hesitant. "May I speak with you for a minute?" he asked, with that formality that persisted despite Marco's attempts to create a more relaxed atmosphere. "Of course," he replied, closing the folder of documents. "And you can call me Marco. We've already talked about this." The girl went inside, but remained near the door as if prepared for a quick retreat if necessary. I wanted to know if I could take some of my mum's things to my room. The photos, mainly." Marco smiled, trying to hide the sadness he felt upon realizing how much the girl still feared having her wishes denied. "Helena, this is your home. Now, of course, you can bring your mother's things. In fact, we could collect anything you want to keep, photos, mementos, anything that's important to you." The girl's eyes lit up briefly. "Serious?" "Absolutely. We can go there today after the appointment with Dr. Agnes." Helena allowed herself a small smile, but quickly returned to her serious expression. "There's one more thing," he said, playing with the hem of his shirt. I lied to you, sir." Marco frowned, surprised by the sudden confession. "About what?" "About not having read Mum's notes." Helena took a deep breath before continuing. "I read them. All of them." The businessman felt a chill run down his spine. This could be the missing link to understanding what had really happened to Rose and the documents. "And what did those notes say?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral, trying not to show how potentially valuable that information was. "Mum wrote about her work at the company, about numbers that didn't add up, about a man who pressured her to sign documents she found strange." "Did this man have a name?" Helena hesitated. Sometimes she called him V, other times she wrote the partner. "Victor, it had to be him." Marco felt a wave of anger rising in his chest, but he controlled himself so as not to frighten the girl. "I understand. And what else did she write?" "She was afraid. She said she was gathering evidence, that one day she would show the main boss what was happening." I think the boss was you." Marco nodded, feeling guilty for not having been more present at that time, for having allowed Victor to run the finance department with so much autonomy. And what about the folder? Did she mention how she got those documents? Helena shook her head. Not directly. But in one of her last notes she wrote, "I finally have everything. Now they can't deny it." It was shortly before she was fired. The story was starting to make sense. Rose had probably discovered Victor's irregularities and gathered evidence, the same documents that had saved Marco. But before she could report them, she was fired on false charges. "Helena, would you mind if I read these notes?" The girl bit her lip, clearly conflicted. They're things about Mom, private things." "I understand," Marco replied kindly. "And I respect that. But they can help clarify what happened to your mother at the company, maybe even clear her name." The mention of the possibility of repairing her mother's reputation seemed to touch Helena deeply. She suffered a lot because of that, you know. People in the neighborhood talked about it, saying she had stolen something. Mom would cry at night when she thought I was asleep. Marco felt the weight of the injustice that he had indirectly helped to perpetrate. "I'm so sorry about that, Helena, truly, and I want to do everything in my power to rectify this situation." The girl studied Marco's face as if assessing his sincerity. "I can show you her notebooks when we go to pick up our things," she finally decided. "Thank you. It means a lot." After Helena left, Marco remained motionless in his chair, absorbing the new information. The story was more complex and sinister than he had initially imagined. It wasn't just about a missing file, but about a possible conspiracy that had resulted in the unfair dismissal of an employee, and perhaps indirectly, in the difficulties that led to her illness and premature death. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Viola. "Mr. Allianz, please forgive me for bothering you on Saturday, but I thought you might want to know. Advisor Felipe is trying to schedule a private meeting with you. He said it's urgent." "Felipe?" Marco asked, surprised. The advisor rarely contacted him outside of the corporate environment. "He mentioned the subject." "Not directly, sir. I only said it was about the closed case, and that I preferred not to discuss it over the phone." The case was closed, a clear reference to Rose's dismissal. "Schedule it for Monday before the board meeting," Marco instructed. "Yes, sir. And there's one more thing. Mr. Victor was at the company earlier today with his son. They both spent a good amount of time in the HR department." Marco frowned. What were Victor and Theo looking for in human resources? Did they request any specific document? The HR manager didn't want to give details, sir. She only mentioned that it was a review of old processes. Old processes, like Rose Carmin's, perhaps. "Thank you, Viola. Please ask security to check which files were accessed and inform me discreetly." "Yes, sir. Anything else?" Marco hesitated. He was about to mention his visit to Helena's old apartment, but something made him reconsider. The fewer people who knew about his movements, the better. "No, that's all. Have a good weekend, Viola." He hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair, lost in thought. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, forming a disturbing picture. Victor not only had a motive for wanting to sabotage him, but he also seemed to be erasing traces of his past actions. And Theo's constant presence by his side suggested a father-son alliance with specific objectives. A cheerful shout from Aaron in the playroom brought Marco back to the present. He stood up, determined to keep his promise to teach the boy chess. The investigation into Rose would have to wait a few hours. For now, his focus needed to be on the children who were now under his responsibility. He found Aaron arranging the pieces on the board, with the concentration typical of someone determined to learn something new. "Ready for your first chess lesson?" Marco asked, sitting down in front of the boy. "Yes," exclaimed Aaron enthusiastically. "Helena said it's a strategy game, like a battle." "It's a bit more than that," Marco smiled. "It's a game about prediction, patience, and sometimes necessary sacrifices." While explaining the basic rules to the boy, Marco couldn't help but think about how chess was a perfect metaphor for the situation he was in. Pieces moving on a board, strategies being devised, attacks and defenses being planned, and at the center of it all, the figure of the king, vulnerable but essential, surrounded by more powerful pieces seeking his destruction. The question was, Who was really in control of the game? On Monday, Helena woke up even before her alarm clock rang. She lay in the spacious bed, observing the ceiling of the room, which still seemed foreignly luxurious. The curtains filtered the soft morning light, creating delicate shadows on the blue-green painted walls. She sat up in bed, trying to calm the anxiety growing in her chest. Today was her first day at St. Patrick's College. New uniform, new classmates, new teachers, everything new and intimidating. On Saturday, after the session with Dr. Agnes, Marco took them to the old apartment to retrieve their personal belongings. Helena showed him her mother's notebook, hidden in a shoebox at the back of the closet, along with some old photos and documents. Marco spent long minutes reading the pages, his face taking on an increasingly somber expression. "Your mother was a courageous person," he had said, finally closing the notebook, "and very intelligent." Helena felt a mixture of pride and sadness. On the one hand, it was good to hear someone like Marco praise her mother. On the other, her absence became even more painful during important moments, like that first day at a new school. She stood up and walked to the closet. Her St. Patrick's Day uniform hung there immaculate, a plaid skirt in shades of green and blue, a white shirt, and a navy blue blazer with the school emblem. So different from the simple uniform of her old municipal school. She dressed slowly, adjusting each piece carefully. At her old school, her uniform was often worn or slightly too big, a legacy of donation programs. Now each item had been custom-made after a visit to the tailor who served the students at the institution. When she finished getting ready, Helena looked at herself in the full-length mirror. The reflected image seemed to belong to someone else, a privileged girl who had always had everything. Not Rose Carmen's daughter, who had often gone to bed hungry so that her younger brother could eat. "I'm doing this for you, Mum," she whispered to her reflection, "to have the future you dreamed for me." He went downstairs for breakfast, finding Marco already at the table reading the business newspaper. Aaron was still asleep. His school started later. "Good morning," greeted the businessman, putting down his newspaper. "Did you sleep well?" Helena nodded, sitting down at the table where Anna had already served orange juice and a variety of breakfast options. "You look very elegant," Marco complimented. "The uniform fits perfectly." The girl murmured a thank you, helping herself to a slice of whole wheat bread. "Nervous?" Marco asked, observing her attentively. "A little," Helena admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. Normally she would have simply denied it, as she did when her mother asked if she was worried about something. "That's natural. New schools are always challenging, even more so one like St. Patrick." Helena bit her lip hesitantly. "What if they don't like me? The other children, I mean." Marco put down the newspaper, giving the girl his full attention. "Helena, you are intelligent, educated, and possess an inner strength that few adults have. Anyone who doesn't like you will be missing out on the opportunity to meet someone extraordinary." The words sounded sincere, almost surprising Helena. In recent days, despite all of Marco's kindness, she still wondered if his motivation for helping them was purely gratitude for the folder, or if there was something more, guilt, perhaps, for what had happened to his mother. "Thank you," she said simply, feeling a little more confident. At 7:40 they left the apartment. Helena was carrying a new backpack, full of new materials. Marco had insisted on accompanying her personally on the first day, despite having an important meeting with the board later. The car glided silently through the streets of the capital, moving away from the center towards a leafy neighborhood where the city's most traditional educational institutions were located. Helena watched the landscape change through the window, trying to absorb every detail. "St. Patrick's has over 100 years of history," Marco commented, breaking the silence. "Many of its students have become important leaders in society." "Is that why you chose him?" Helena asked. "So that I can become a leader?" Marco smiled at the insight of the question. "I chose it because it offers a complete education, not just academic but human. And as for becoming a leader..." He studied her for a moment before continuing. "I believe you already have that quality naturally. The school will only help you develop it." They arrived at the imposing neo-Gothic building that housed St. Patrick's College. Perfectly manicured gardens framed the entrance, where other cars dropped off impeccably uniformed students. Helena felt her stomach clench. Everyone seemed so self-assured, so much a part of that world. "Remember," Marco said, as if reading her thoughts, "you have as much right to be here as any of them." They got out of the car and walked to the office, where they were greeted by the principal, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression but kind eyes. "Mr. Allianz, welcome to St. Patrick's Day. And you must be Helena." The girl nodded, shaking the principal's outstretched hand. "We are very happy to welcome her. Her academic record is impressive, especially in mathematics and science." The admissions process was surprisingly smooth. The principal explained the school's rules and traditions, handed out a map of the campus and assigned a senior student, Chiara, to mentor Helena during her first few days. Chiara was a tall, slender teenager with almond-shaped eyes and a friendly expression. She greeted Helena with a genuine smile. "Welcome to St. Patrick's Day. I'll show you everything, including the shortcuts the teachers don't know about," he confided with a wink. When the time came for Marco to say goodbye, Helena felt a sudden urge to cling to him, to beg him not to leave her in that strange environment. But she restrained herself, maintaining the dignified posture that her mother had always praised. "Good luck," said Marco, surprising her with a brief hug. "I'll be here at 3 to pick you up." "Thank you," Helena replied, amazed at her own emotional control. As she watched Marco walk away, she felt Chiara lightly touch her arm. "Shall we go? The first bell is about to ring and we have to cross the central courtyard to get to your classroom." Helena nodded, following her new classmate. As they walked through the historic hallways of the school, with its stained glass windows and portraits of former headmasters, she couldn't help but think about how drastically her life had changed in just 2 weeks. "Is your father Marco Allianz from Allianz Incorporadora?" Chiara asked curiously. "He's my guardian," Helena corrected automatically. "My parents, they're no longer here." Chiara seemed embarrassed. "Sorry, I didn't know." "That's fine," Helena replied. "This arrangement with Mr. Marco is recent." The other girl nodded understandingly. "Well, whatever the case may be, you got lucky. I've heard he's one of the most decent men in the business world. My father works in real estate and always speaks highly of him." Helena felt a pang of pride, followed by a strange sense of loyalty she couldn't explain. It was as if suddenly she felt the need to defend Marco, to confirm that yes, he was a good person. "He has been very kind to me and my brother," he said simply. They arrived at the 7th grade classroom, where Helena was to be introduced to the class. Before they went in, Chiara held her arm. "Look, some students here can be difficult at first, especially new students who arrive mid-year. Don't take it personally, okay?" Helena nodded, grateful for the warning. She wasn't naive. She knew that her presence there as the sudden protégé of an important businessman would generate curiosity and possibly resentment. "I'm used to dealing with difficult situations," she replied, with a confidence that surprised Chiara. "Great. Let's go then. And if you need anything, I'll be in 9th grade, room C." The door to the room opened, and Helena took her first step into her new reality. 20 pairs of curious eyes turned to her, assessing every detail of her appearance and posture. The professor, a middle-aged man in a tweed sweater, smiled encouragingly. "Class, this is Helena Carmen, our new student. Please welcome her." A discordant chorus of "welcome" echoed through the room, some sincere, others clearly forced. Helena took a deep breath and walked to the empty desk indicated by the teacher, keeping her head held high and her gaze steady. "Be strong like the plants that grow in the cracks of the concrete," she repeated mentally, her mother's words echoing in her memory. Small but strong. The first day at St. Patrick's had only just begun, and Helena knew that many challenges still lay ahead. But she was determined to face them with the same courage she had seen in her mother, even in the most difficult circumstances. As she opened the new notebook on her wallet, a thought crossed her mind. Somewhere in the city at that very moment, Marco was also facing his own challenges, and for some reason she didn't fully understand, Helena sincerely wished him success as well. Perhaps, he thought, They weren't so different after all. Marco arrived at Alianza Incorporadora's headquarters at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before his scheduled meeting with Felipe. Since dropping Helena off at school, his mind had been alternating between worrying about the girl's adjustment and anxious about what the advisor wanted to discuss so urgently. The folder containing Rose Carmen's notes was in his briefcase. After reading through its contents over the weekend, Marco was certain. The former employee had uncovered an embezzlement scheme led by Victor, possibly with the knowledge of other company executives. Rose's meticulous records detailed dates, amounts, and accounting inconsistencies that together painted an alarming picture of corporate fraud. "Mr. Allianz, advisor Felipe is already in the private meeting room," Viola informed him as soon as Marco entered his office. "Thank you. Any news about the files Victor and Theo accessed on Saturday?" The assistant handed him a discreet envelope. "The head of security prepared this report. Apparently, they requested access to several files from the finance department from the period between 2019 and 2020, including Rose Carmen's dismissal process." Marco felt his stomach clench. His suspicions were correct. "Anything else?" "Yes, sir. Theo Lehman has requested a private meeting with the board for this afternoon, after the board meeting. The stated subject is restructuring of the Ethics Committee." A strategic move, Marco thought. The Ethics Committee oversaw internal investigations and established corporate conduct guidelines. Having influence over this body would be crucial for anyone who wanted to control narratives about past wrongdoing. "I understand. Please don't put me through on any calls during my conversation with Felipe, unless it's about Helena or Aaron." Marco went to the private meeting room on the executive floor. Upon entering, he found Felipe standing by the window, gazing at the city view with a worried expression. "Thank you for arriving early," said the advisor, turning to greet him. "Your tone on the phone suggested urgency," Marco replied, placing his briefcase on the table. "What does case closed mean?" Felipe hesitated, nervously adjusting his glasses. "Rose Carmen," he finally said, "I think you need to know the whole truth about what happened to her." Marco felt a mixture of apprehension and relief. Finally, someone willing to speak openly about the case. "I'm listening." Felipe sat down, inviting Marco to do the same. "First of all, I need you to understand, I wasn't directly involved. I only learned the details months later when it was already too late." "Too late for what?" "To prevent injustice." Felipe took a deep breath before continuing. "Rose wasn't fired for accounting irregularities. That was the official pretext created by Victor. The truth is that she discovered discrepancies in Project Meridian's accounts and started investigating on her own. Project Meridiano was one of Allianz's largest undertakings, an office complex in the financial center of the capital, completed in 2019. What kind of discrepancies? Systematic overbilling, contracts with shell companies, diversion of materials, a sophisticated scheme that, according to my estimates, diverted approximately 40 million over 3 years. Marco felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. 40 million, embezzled from his own company right under his nose. And Victor was behind this? Victor was the lead architect, but he didn't act alone. There were others involved, some of whom are still with the company. "Names, Felipe, I need names." The advisor seemed uncomfortable. "I don't have concrete evidence against everyone, only suspicions based on patterns of behavior and corporate alliances." "Then tell me who you suspect." Felipe hesitated again, but eventually gave in. "Alfonso from the legal department, Mauricio from the accounting department, and—" He paused dramatically. "I believe Pietro, your current financial director, is also involved." Pietro Ollins, a man whom Marco considered not only a competent executive, but almost a friend, someone he trusted enough to promote after Victor left. "That's a serious accusation, Felipe. Pietro came from external auditing. He was the one who implemented our new transparency controls. What would make him the ideal wolf to guard the henhouse, don't you think?" Felipe leaned forward. "Think about it, Marco. Who better to hide irregularities than someone who has a deep understanding of auditing mechanisms? The theory made sense, however painful it was. Marco tried to remain calm, processing the implications of those revelations. Going back to Rose Carmen, what exactly did she discover? Documents that proved the existence of the scheme, the same ones that I believe were in the folder her daughter gave her. Marco nodded, opening his briefcase and taking out Rose's notebook. She meticulously documented everything: dates, values, code names, a complete private investigation. Felipe examined the notebook with a somber expression. This confirms what I suspected. Rose was preparing a dossier to present to you, but before she could do so, Victor found out and orchestrated her dismissal. How did he manage to silence her so effectively? Why didn't she come directly to me after being fired? A shadow seemed to cross Philip's face. That's the most complicated part of the story. He hesitated, as if measuring his words. Victor used other types of pressure, besides the dismissal: veiled threats, defamation in professional circles, and— Felipe lowered his voice. There are rumors that Rose had a relationship with someone in the company's upper management, someone married. Victor allegedly used this against her, threatening to expose the affair. Marco felt his blood run cold. A secret relationship within the company involving someone from senior management. Who? He asked, dreading the answer. Felipe looked away. Like I said, these are just rumors. Nothing is confirmed. Felipe, look me in the eyes and tell me who supposedly had an affair with Rose Carmen. The advisor finally confronted Marco. Some said it was Victor himself, others— He paused painfully. Others mentioned his name, Marco. The room seemed to spin for a moment. Marco? An affair with Rose? The idea was absurd. He barely remembered the woman, having only interacted with her in large departmental meetings. This is ridiculous, he protested, feeling his anger rising. This is clearly an attempt to destabilize me. I agree, Felipe quickly added. I only mentioned it because these rumors are being revived. Theo has been asking questions, probing former employees. I believe he's building some kind of narrative to use against you. Marco stood up, unable to remain seated. The idea that his name could be so sordidly linked to Helena's mother was disturbing on multiple levels. And what about the folder with the documents? How did Rose get it? I believe she copied the original documents before being fired. Her position in the finance department gave her access to virtually all corporate records. Marco nodded, remembering something Helena had mentioned. She wrote in her diary, "Finally, I have everything. Now they can't deny it." This was shortly before she was fired. Exactly. Victor must have discovered that she was gathering evidence and acted quickly to silence her. A disturbing thought occurred to Marco. Felipe, do you think it's possible that Rose's illness wasn't natural? The advisor seemed genuinely alarmed. No, Marco. We're not going down that road. Victor is many things: greedy, manipulative, vindictive, but I don't believe he would stoop that low. Marco wasn't so sure, but he decided not to press the issue. For now, he needed to focus on the present. Why are you telling me all this now, Felipe? Because Theo is moving pieces. This afternoon's meeting with the ethics committee is just the beginning. I believe he plans to use Rose's case as a weapon, distorting the facts to harm him. With Victor in the background, acting as a mentor, Theo represents a more sophisticated and dangerous threat. Marco reflected on the advisor's assessment. Theo was, in fact, a formidable opponent, educated at the best business schools, connected with the new generation of executives, and skilled in handling both corporate politics and public relations. What do you suggest I do? Felipe took a deep breath before answering. First, protect yourself legally. Hire an independent auditor to thoroughly review the company's accounts, especially the projects Victor oversaw. Second, strengthen your public image. Your social responsibility project with children came at a good time. Third, he paused meaningfully, consider a diplomatic approach with Theo. Approaching me? Marco repeated, incredulous. The man clearly wants to destroy me. Perhaps. Or perhaps he's simply following in his father's footsteps out of filial loyalty. Theo is young, ambitious, and above all, pragmatic. If you offer him an alternative that benefits his career without the need for confrontation, he might consider it. Marco considered the suggestion. It was an interesting, albeit risky, approach. "I'll think about it," he promised, glancing at his watch. "Now we need to prepare for the board meeting." When Felipe left, Marco remained in the room, absorbing everything he had heard. The revelations about Victor and the possible involvement of Pietro and other executives didn't completely surprise him. He had always suspected that his former partner hadn't acted alone. But the rumors about Rose were disturbing. If Theo really intended to use this against him, he would need to be prepared. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Anna. "Helena called from school. Everything is fine, but she asked to speak with you when she can." A wave of worry washed over Marco. Helena wasn't the type to ask for help easily. If she was calling, something significant must have happened. He quickly dialed the girl's cell phone, one of the first gifts he had given her. "Helena, is everything all right?" "Yes," she replied, her voice low, probably speaking from some discreet location in the school. "I just wanted to know if you're really going to pick me up at 3. Marco felt an unexpected tenderness. Beneath the seemingly simple question, he perceived the girl's insecurity in her new environment. "Of course I'll go. I'll be there on time." "Okay, thank you." There was a pause before she added, "The classes are good. Difficult, but good." "I'm glad to hear that. Are you able to keep up with the content?" "Yes. Only the French class is completely new to me. I'm fine in the others." "Don't worry about French. We can hire a private tutor if you need one." Another pause, as if Helena were processing the idea that academic difficulties could be resolved with resources, something probably unprecedented in her experience. "Thank you. I need to hang up now. The break is almost over." "Helena," Marco called before she hung up, "I'm proud of you." A brief silence, then, "Thank you. That means a lot." The call ended, leaving Marco with a strange feeling in his chest. Pride, worry, and a growing affection for that girl who in such a short time had become a significant presence in his life. He turned his attention to the documents on the table. The board meeting would begin in 20 minutes, followed by the meeting Theo had proposed. Marco needed to be prepared for both, especially considering the new information Felipe had shared. He put Rose's notebook in his briefcase and headed to his office for the final preparations. On the way, he passed Pietro's office, observing him through the half-open door. The finance director was engrossed in his computer, his expression concentrated. Could it be that this man, whom Marco had promoted and trusted, was involved in a scheme to embezzle funds? The doubt was painful but necessary. Marco wouldn't make the mistake of trusting blindly again. The board meeting proceeded with surprising tranquility. Victor remained unusually silent for most of the discussions, intervening only on technical matters related to the new projects. Theo, on the other hand, participated actively, demonstrating a deep understanding of the topics discussed and proposing ideas that, Marco had to admit, were intelligent and innovative. When the formal agenda concluded, Theo raised the issue of restructuring the ethics committee. Honorable board members, as you all know, corporate governance has evolved significantly in recent years, he began, with the eloquence of someone accustomed to executive presentations. Our ethics committee, however, remains structured according to outdated models. I propose a complete overhaul, starting with the inclusion of independent members and the expansion of its responsibilities. The proposal seemed reasonable at first glance, even commendable, but Marco perceived the underlying strategy to weaken his authority over internal investigations and create a body that, under the guise of independence, could be easily manipulated by Theo and Victor. "An interesting initiative," commented Marco, maintaining a neutral tone. "However, I believe that such a significant reformulation deserves careful analysis. I suggest the formation of a working group to develop detailed proposals, which can be evaluated at the next meeting." It was a delaying tactic, but a necessary one. He needed time to fully understand Theo's intentions and prepare an appropriate response. Surprisingly, Young Lyman agreed without hesitation. Excellent suggestion, Mr. Allianz. Indeed, a change of this magnitude must be implemented with due care. I would be happy to lead this working group if the board approves. The proposal was unanimously accepted, and Theo gained the official authority to conduct the studies on the restructuring of the committee. Marco watched Victor feign a satisfied smile. Clearly, father and son were executing a carefully crafted plan. After the meeting ended, as the council members dispersed, Theo approached Marco. "Mr. Allianz, could I spare a few minutes? I'd like to discuss a few additional points regarding the working group." "Certainly," Marco replied, leading him to his private office. Once alone, Theo partially abandoned formality, leaning back comfortably in the chair opposite Marco's desk. "Thank you for supporting my initiative," he began with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I believe we can make significant changes to the company's ethical culture." "Ethics has always been a fundamental value for Allianz," Marco replied, carefully studying the young man's expression. "Since its founding." "Without a doubt. However, even the best intentions can be lost when a company grows exponentially, right? Procedures are circumvented, supervision fails, people make mistakes. Or crimes," Marco concluded, deciding to address the elephant in the room directly. Theo arched his eyebrows slightly, maintaining his composure. "Crimes is a strong word, Mr. Allianz, but appropriate in some cases, such as in the scheme to divert resources from Project Meridian." The direct mention of the project seemed to surprise Theo momentarily, but he recovered with admirable speed. "Ah, the famous Project Meridian. My father always considered it a milestone in the company's history. It's interesting that you mention it right now." "Interesting why?" Theo smiled enigmatically. "Because I've heard rumors about irregularities in the management of this project. Nothing confirmed, obviously, just hallway gossip." "What kind of irregularities exactly?" "Several. Overpricing, questionable contracts, the usual problems in large projects with inadequate supervision." Marco maintained a neutral expression, despite his growing anger. "And who would be responsible for these alleged irregularities?" Theo made a vague gesture with his hand. "It's difficult to determine responsibilities in complex corporate structures. The CFO at the time, the project supervisor, perhaps—" He paused deliberately. "Perhaps the chairman himself." The veiled accusation hung in the air like toxic smoke. Marco understood the game. Theo and Victor were preparing the ground to shift the blame for the embezzlement scheme onto him. "An interesting theory," Marco commented, remaining calm, "especially considering that his father was the financial director and direct supervisor of Project Meridian." A slight blush tinged Theo's cheeks, the first sign of genuine emotion. "My father was always impeccably ethical in his professional conduct," she defended, her voice slightly more tense. "If irregularities occurred under his supervision, it was because others abused his trust." "Like Rose Carmin," Marco teased, watching the young man's reaction intently. The mention of the former employee's name had the desired effect. Theo straightened up in his chair, his body suddenly tense. "Rose Carmin was dismissed for cause. There is substantial documentation proving her infractions." "Fabricated documentation," Marco corrected. "Just like the rumors about his alleged relationship with members of the board." Theo studied Marco for a few moments before answering. "Interesting that you mention those rumors. They did indeed exist, although I personally find that kind of speculation distasteful." He paused deliberately. "Especially now that you've taken custody of her daughter. By the way, how is little Helena doing?" The casual mention of Helena's name, clearly calculated to unsettle him, filled Marco with icy fury. "Helena is doing great, thank you for asking. She's adapting well to her new school and her new life. St. Patrick's, isn't it? An excellent institution. I studied there before going to Europe." Theo leaned forward slightly. "You know, Mr. Allianz, I find your dedication to this child admirable. Truly touching." The condescending tone made Marco clench his fists under the table. "It's not dedication, Theo. It's responsibility, something that some people in this company seem to have forgotten." "Responsibility," the young man repeated as if savoring the word. An interesting concept, especially when we consider the chain of events that led to that girl being under your care. What exactly are you implying? Theo opened his hands in a gesture of feigned innocence. Nothing specific, just observing how fate works in mysterious ways. A controversial former employee falls ill and dies. Her daughter shows up with life-saving documents just when you needed them most. Fascinating coincidences, don't you think? Marco resisted the urge to stand up and end that disturbing conversation. Instead, he kept his voice controlled as he replied, I believe that many coincidences in life have rational explanations when properly investigated. Like the sudden disappearance of important corporate documents, for example. It was Theo's turn to briefly appear uncomfortable. Well, this brings us back to the importance of a robust and independent ethics committee, doesn't it? To properly investigate coincidences. Exactly. And speaking of proper investigations, I've commissioned a full external audit of all projects from the last 5 years. The auditors start tomorrow. The information clearly caught Theo by surprise. A full audit? That's significant. Was the board informed? This will be announced at the next meeting. As president, I have the authority to request audits at any time, especially when there are suspicions of irregularities. Theo quickly regained his composure. Naturally, transparency should always be a priority. He stood up, adjusting his impeccable suit jacket. Well, I won't take up any more of your time, Mr. Allianz. It was an enlightening conversation. It certainly was, Marco agreed, also standing up. Before leaving, Theo paused at the door. Oh, I almost forgot. Congratulations on the speech you'll be giving tomorrow at the social responsibility event. The press will be there, won't they? Marco frowned, confused. Which speech, which event? Theo seemed genuinely surprised. The launch of the New Horizons program. Wasn't it announced? The communications office informed the entire press that you will officially present the program using Helena as a success story. The event is scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main auditorium. Marco felt his blood run cold. He hadn't authorized any event, much less the public display of Helena in a corporate charity setting. There must be some mistake, he said, trying to hide his bewilderment. Perhaps, Theo replied with an enigmatic smile. In any case, I'm sure the communications department can clarify everything. Have a good day, Mr. Allianz. When Theo left, Marco immediately called Viola on the intercom. Please find out everything about a supposed launch event for the New Horizons program scheduled for tomorrow. I want to know who authorized it, who organized it, and most importantly, who included Helena in the program. While waiting for the information, Marco looked at his watch, 2:45 p.m. He would need to leave soon to pick Helena up from school. The conversation with Theo had made it clear that the battle for control of Allianz was only beginning, and now it involved not only his professional reputation, but also the personal life he was beginning to build with the children. The phone rang. It was Pietro, his finance director, the same one Felipe had pointed out as a possible accomplice of Victor. Marco, excuse the interruption, but we need to talk urgently about the external audit. I have some concerns. Sure, Pietro. Stop by my office at 9 a.m. tomorrow. As he hung up, Marco felt the weight of the suspicions he now carried. Pietro, an executive he had trusted completely until just a few hours before, was now a potential threat. The quick reaction to the news of the audit only increased those suspicions. With a tired sigh, Marco picked up his briefcase and headed for the elevator. The day's revelations would have to wait. Now his priority was to pick Helena up from school, as he had promised. Amid so much uncertainty and betrayal, keeping his word to the girl seemed more important than ever. As the elevator descended, Marco reflected on how his life had changed in just 2 weeks. From a solitary businessman focused exclusively on work, he had transformed into the guardian of 2 vulnerable children and the target of an elaborate corporate conspiracy. And most surprisingly, despite the added complications, he didn't regret taking Helena and Aaron in end of story. Dear listeners, we hope Helena and Marco's story has touched your hearts. A narrative that reminds us how the truth, even when they try to bury it, always finds a way to come to light. For more equally moving stories about courage, integrity, and overcoming adversity, We have a special playlist that you can access by clicking the link on the left. If this story stirred emotions in you, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Every day we bring you new narratives that explore the complexity of life and the strength of the human spirit. Share in the comments which moment of Helena's journey touched you the most. We love to hear your impressions. Until our next story.